Welcome to Perspectives, a podcast where the clergy women of the First United Methodist Church of San Diego share their musings on scripture, theology, and what it has to do with us.
Welcome to Perspectives. I'm so glad that you're joining us and listening to us. I'm Reverend Hannah here, and I'm here with Reverend Brittany.
Hi.
And we are starting a new sermon series on our money story. Mm-hmm. Are you ready for a new sermon series?
I think so. I'm nervous.
On money?
I'm a little nervous.
Okay. So today's theme is on remember,
Mm-hmm.
based on the story of Exodus chapter 16, verses 11 through 18. And this is the story that my mother used to tell me every time she wanted to remind me that everything came from God.
Oh, okay.
So I have a love-hate relationship with this text. So the story goes like this. The Lord spoke to Moses, "I have heard the complaining of the Israelites, and said to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God." Mm-hmm. In the evening, quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" Mm-hmm. For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It's the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you needs, an omer per person, according to the number of persons, all providing for those in their own tents." Mm-hmm. The Israelites did so, some gathering more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, those who gathered much had nothing over, and those who gathered little had no shortage. They gathered as much as each of them needed. Here is the story. What do you think? So, before you go, as a foodie and as one who gets hangry easily, I try to understand this text within their own context. So they just left Elim prior to this text, kind of oasis in the desert, abundant place, and full of springs and palm trees and foods and drinks. And they have traveled about 6 weeks into their journey. So 6 weeks. Well, I can pack for a week. I don't know if I can pack for 6 weeks.
Right.
And they've been on this journey and not having enough food. And I'm pretty sure that they were counting all the grains they have in their pocket. So they were hungry, uncertain, and they were sort of afraid. You don't even know where the next meal is coming from. So usually the food crisis becomes a multiple crises,
Right.
and relationship-wise, and it also becomes a faith crisis.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to mention that as a foodie and as a person who gets hangry easily.
I think that reminds me of the commercials from my growing up with Snickers, and it was like, if you're hungry, grab a Snickers because you're not yourself when you're hungry, right? That was like their tagline,
Yes.
right? So exactly with what you're saying, these folks have escaped slavery. They have reached a level of freedom. They went to this oasis in the desert where they had plenty, and now they're making their way to the promised land, and they have nothing.
In the wilderness.
Right? And so when I was reading this text, the first thing that came to me from a sociological social worker standpoint was Maslow's hierarchy of needs, And I think that the Israelites kind of get a bad rep for complaining about being hungry. But when you're hungry, that's literally all you can think about, you know?
Of course.
And it's like some of the work that I've done with children in schools, right? If a child is hungry when they come into a classroom, they're not going to be, concerned with the arithmetic. They're not going to be concerned with the English lesson. Or civil or kind, they're hungry. Their basic need hasn't been met. And so Maslow's hierarchy of needs, physiological needs. So you need air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing. That's at the bottom. Like, that's the baseline. You can't move up the hierarchy if those things aren't met, right? And so if these folks are hungry, then they can't worry about their safety, right? Employment wasn't a thing for them, but they couldn't worry about, who was sick and who wasn't sick. They're trying to get their needs met. And then you really can't move up to love and belonging, right? I'm sure they were not pleasant to be around if you're hungry, right? And worried about where your next meal is coming from. You can't move up to having self-respect or self-esteem or recognition or strength or really understanding what freedom is if you're still at the bottom and hungry. And then, of course, you can't reach the top of self-actualization to be the most that you can be in the world if you can't get your basic needs met. So sometimes I think that, I understand why we look at the Israelites and say, oh, you complained so much. But, I complain for less when I'm hungry, like you're saying, you know?
And also, at the same time, this is how I view the scripture. It's not about a myth. It's not about certain people modeling bad behaviors.
Right.
It's our human nature recorded in the scripture.
Exactly.
Every chapter of the Bible, whether it's poetry or history or any other genres, I see myself in their own shoes.
Exactly.
And
for sure.
I'm glad that they didn't kill Moses or Aaron. They were just complaining verbally.
Right.
So I think it was pretty reasonable for them
to complain.
To be in the 6 weeks at the bottom of that hierarchy, not met, and complaining.
And then I also think about Moses and Aaron, right? Because I see it from their vantage point as well. I'm doing the best that I can. You know what I mean? I don't know. We're figuring this thing out together. And so I understand frustration on both parts, right? Again, it's a human nature, and I can see myself in Moses and Aaron, and I can see myself in the Israelites. And on my greater days, I try to, reconcile both. But I definitely understand what it means to be afraid of not having enough.
Yes, and you just diversified where we can put ourselves in. And there's that leadership and the mass. And then they're in the wilderness, context of a wilderness. And what we are often neglecting is to see God in their midst.
Exactly.
So if God were God, we often imagine the judge and the warrior and all those scary stuff. God could wipe them out in anger or react to their complaints in frustration. But we hear it in today's text, God's response with provision.
Yeah.
Not
I have heard
anger.
the complaining.
Yes.
Yeah.
God was present with them and interacting with them. And did you want to say something about, I heard your complaint?
No, I was just responding to what you were saying, that God heard them.
Yes. And God did not respond to the complainers alone. I'm pretty sure out of hundreds, thousands of people, there are people who are louder in their complaints and less louder or not even well enough to complain. But the provision came with an invitation to test out their trust in God. So it started with the basic commodity, and it's related to faith and trust now. And God was putting them into a test with abundant provision. Here it comes through the natural provision that you need to gather as much as you need each day. Do not go overboard. Do not steal someone else's. We'll see how well you are in sharing your blessing with the rest of the community. So think about this provision of food in the middle of nowhere through the winds and the temperature changes. It's there each day.
Every day, yeah.
Every day, and you don't know what's going to happen next day, but you only have to you have to gather only for the day.
Which I think would be, there are two things. First of all, I think when you haven't had, we have a tendency, or when we're afraid that we won't have enough, we have a tendency to hoard, right? But before we get into that, going back to when the Lord spoke to Moses and said, I have heard the complaining of the Israelites. There's something about, I think this opens up, for me, reading it, and actually just hit me for the first time. I've heard the complaining of the Israelites, and then God responds with the provision that you're talking about. And I think about how often we don't cry out to God, right? Because we either feel like it's insignificant, it doesn't matter, our pain doesn't matter. But this to me is like they complained and God heard them. So that means that God is concerned about our needs, right? And so what would it look like to express our needs to God without this fear of being too much or being seen as ungrateful, but really trying to let God know more intimately the concerns of your heart rather than trying to keep them to yourself.
Yes, and that also starts with our own recognition that God is present in your most distressed time, in your most challenging time, in your most lonely and desperate moments. God is present, and we just need to start talking.
Exactly.
Communicating,
expressing it,
and find putting ourselves in a bigger scheme of things. That God is present with the entire community.
And then when we were just talking about, you said that there was enough, right? And you only had to worry about today, and like. That's so beautiful. And I think that there are moments in my life where I have had that feeling where, like, I can only worry about today. But if I'm honest, I can maybe count that on 2 fingers, right? Most of the time, I'm like, oh, what am I going to do about tomorrow? Tomorrow, oh, my God, I'm worried about this thing and that thing.
Sleep.
And that's when you lose sleep. I might not even be eating, right? But this sometimes, this fear, right? Especially, I'm thinking about them having been enslaved, right? And having had to make the best out of what they had. The freedom, right? Freedom looks differently to them, right? Life looks differently to them now. If we put it in the context of finances, I think about my own experience having grown up pretty poor, right? And the fear of not having enough. And even though I am no longer in that same financial situation that I was as a child, the fear of not having enough or not being able to make it enough is terrifying sometimes. And I find myself not necessarily not food, but money, right? Am I going to have enough to pay my student loans? Am I going to have, am I going to be in credit card debt? Am I going to, whatever the myriad of financial concerns are, they're not the same as they were when I was a child. I have this different freedom, but with that freedom still comes its own burden, right? Like, just because you're free from this thing doesn't mean that life will be free of all of the burdens that are to come. Does that make sense?
Yes. And it's even worse for these people. It's easier for us to free from that fear and anxiety as we move on to the next stage or next phase of life. But for these people, they never experienced hunger.
Right. Because even when they were enslaved, right?
They were able to eat meat and eat abundantly. But now, those comfort that they have lived with is taken away. And imagine yourself 10 years from now not having what you are enjoying right now.
I don't want to. I don't even want to consider it. Right?
See? That's the level of stress that we're going through.
Yeah. That really thinking about leaving Pharaoh's house where you had food to eat. You didn't have to worry about where your next meal was coming from. But you were enslaved. And you were treated horribly. But now...
You'd rather
be enslaved, right? Because that's what they say. They say, we'd rather... You pulled us out of Egypt to leave us to die. We'd rather have been enslaved. That's deep and tough to think about. That you would rather go back to slavery because you know what to expect.
Yes. Walk into the pain of the past.
Right.
You have to choose better of the two bad options.
Exactly. Would I rather go back to Pharaoh's house and build the pyramids and the temples
carry heavy loads.
and carry the heavy loads? Or would I rather be free, but now I'm starving?
That's a tough
choice to make, right? And it kind of, in both of those instances, may feel like, where is God in this? Where were you in my oppression? Now where are you in my freedom? That almost feels like oppression, you know?
Yes, and today's text, tells us that God shows up in our ordinary days.
Yeah.
Not through the spectacles of dividing the sea or anything like that, but is present.
Right.
When you have to make a very desperate choice.
And I keep coming back, I guess it's the sociologist in me, when I read this text. You know, God doesn't tell Moses to tell the Israelites to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, right? They didn't have to earn this sense of, like, this care and their needs being met, right? And in our society, in our culture, in our enculturation, we have this idea that people are in the situation that they're in because of their own doing, right? And in this situation, God says, if you need more, take more. And if you need less, take less. But every person should be provided for. And what then does that look like for us today if we took that seriously?
Yes, and it's prior to capitalistic society, and it was different, and they were shaping their tribal or communal identity in their relationship with God, and there comes this crisis in food scarcity.
Right.
So this is a good classic example of how we intertwine our food security or our daily life with our faith in God and how we journey with God as a part of the whole community who tries to covenant with this God who responds to your complaints with provision.
And to think, though, about what you're saying, food insecurity at this point, they don't know where their meal is coming from. They don't know, what's going to happen. Food insecurity is becoming a huge issue in this country, the richest nation in the world. People are struggling to provide food. The cost of eggs is $1 million and $2. The cost of food is going up, especially food that's healthy, right? We see that folks who receive SNAP benefits, which is like, food stamps and, those kinds of assistance, that those funds are being cut. So, like, people really are dealing with a sense of food insecurity in this country in a way that I don't think in my growing up I was aware of. Or even knowing that, like, there were kids in my class, right, who didn't have, I was poor, but I ate every day. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't have that particular worry. I didn't realize that I had classmates who did. You know, I didn't realize that I went to school with folks who didn't have any place to live. My apartment might have been little, right? But it was an apartment, and it was warm, and it was safe, and it was mine, right?
Yes.
And so I was able to work my way up that hierarchy of needs in ways that other of my classmates may have had to struggle, right? Or when I think about folks who get free or reduced lunch, that's like sometimes the only meal that those kids get. And, you know, during the day. And when I was growing up, even if you didn't have the money to pay for your lunch, they would just let you eat. That's not the case anymore. They will not, I mean, in many school districts, they will not let the child eat if they don't have free or reduced lunch, or they didn't have the money that day.
Yes. And also prior to even further crisis in food security in the U.S., I've been telling people that it's not just people in Somalia, not people in Vietnam, people in the U.S. do not have adequate resources, food, clothing, and clean water or housing.
Hello.
And we're neglecting some of those people who are not able to gather their daily manna on their own, and while some others have overage of manna and quail in their pockets. And this is when we need to remind ourselves of this story. God telling us, remember,
Remember.
in the wilderness.
And to remember that there is an abundance. I mean, I think we live in a scarcity society, right? And we have created a scarcity mindset within ourselves. We've been enculturated with that. But really and truly, there is enough if we are to share what we have with others. And so I think about Jesus feeding the 5,000, right? It appears that there's not enough. The disciples are like, Lord, I don't know what you finna do, because we got this many fish and this is the bread. And God says, pull it out. Or Jesus says, pull it out and let's see what we can do with that.
And again and again, it's about feeding everyone in the congregation, in the crowd, not earning your own stuff.
Exactly.
It's provision from God, and that's how we might have to reset how we understand our resources and our material and resource, and different way of looking at resources.
Yeah.
How we share them too.
This text is exactly, where our theme is to remember, and to remember that what God did for the Israelites, God does for us as well. And I think that's why Jesus in the Lord's Prayer give us this day our daily bread, right? Making sure that we have enough for today, not enough for the year, not enough for the month, not enough for tomorrow and the day after, but give us our daily bread.
So as we were preparing for this episode, I was wondering about if Jesus was referencing to manna in his prayer, and how they were called to live as a community in terms of how we think of the resources given to individuals, but it's also our communal blessing. So this is a good stuff.
It's a very socialist. I'm looking at it from a sociological standpoint, but just this idea that no one should go without. That no one should go without.
Well, the whole entire Bible, the Hebrew Bible and the Christian text, are forms of primitive socialism and communism, I mean. And whenever I say that in Korean church settings, yes. But you're not wrong in saying that this is part of, it's a classic evidence of primitive communism, practiced and proclaimed by people of Israel and Jesus, and we were called to live that out. But we get called to be communist. Rather than Christians.
This is just my last point. As a child, I always had a question. Like, I think I've said this before. We went to the grocery store and there were my mother was getting Raisin Bran, and I just didn't understand why we had to pay for it because there was so much Raisin Bran. And I said, well, why do we have to pay for it? Like, isn't it God's Raisin Bran? And she was like, she couldn't really give me an answer, but she was like, we have to pay for it because that's what we have to do. But when I think about it, as a child, from my child's standpoint, I was just trying to understand why so many people went. Why if God has given us so much, so many resources, why is it that we control who gets it and who has access to it if it all comes from God, right? If the water comes from God, if the air comes from God, if the food comes from God, the plant, the animal, why are we, who has authority over this other than God? I've always struggled with that question.
Yeah.
It's like the manna.
And that's the tension we always hold as people of faith.
Right.
We confess that everything came from God, but we strive to gain more access to the resources for comfort and convenience.
Yeah.
So this is a good time for us to think about our money story, to think about, to remember God's involvement in our faith and in our sustenance and all of that. So,
and how we can bring our resources together so that we can do more together than we could do individually.
Yes,
Right?
yes. And this story will come in 4 different segments. And today we talked about remembering is also an expression of faith and our first step of building relationship with God, and which shapes how I build relationship with other people and with my own resources as part of God's money story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Woo! Man, the Bible gets me every time, but it's so interesting. And I'm very glad that I got to share my perspective with you, and you got to share your perspective with me, and we got to share our perspectives with the folks. We have a couple questions that we'd like you to ponder. Our first question is, how does this I'm sorry, that's not what it says. Our first question is, what does this passage say about God's care for the vulnerable? Our second question is, where in your life are you being asked to trust in daily bread rather than long-time certainty? Woo! It's a deep one. Third, what does enough look like for you? And lastly, how do you experience God's provision, spiritually, emotionally, or materially, in the wilderness of your life? We hope that you'll ponder these questions. You can ponder them aloud or you can reflect on them internally. We invite you to come to our Convergence conversation after our tapestry service at 12 o'clock on Sundays. And if you'd like to just shoot us an email about what you're thinking, please feel free to do that. Thanks for joining us. See you next time. Bye.
This is a production of First United Methodist Church of San Diego. To learn more about our events and ministries and to access additional learning resources, visit FUMCSD.org.